The data slate hit Jake in the shoulder, approximately 3 seconds after he sat down, which was actually an improvement over his last visit to the Classification Processing Center, when one had struck him directly in the forehead before he even made it through the door. He caught the tumbling device with one hand, still holding the forms he had spent 6 hours filling out in triplicate, and placed it gently on the desk in front of him. The desk groaned. It had not been designed for gentle placement of anything. It had been designed for Scoreth, which meant it stood at roughly chest height on Jake and featured a surface that curved inward like a shallow bowl, presumably to accommodate their segmented underbellies when they leaned forward. Jake did not have a segmented underbelly. He had a regulation logistics coordinator uniform, a laminated identification badge, and a classification error that had followed him across 3-star systems like a particularly dedicated stray cat. Vrektal, the senior classification officer, stood on the opposite side of the curved desk with all 4 of his glossy black eyes fixed on the data slate Jake had just rescued from gravity. The Scoreth's rust-red carapace gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and his 2 antennae were pressed so flat against his elongated skull that they had practically disappeared into the grooves of his exoskeleton. This was, Jake had learned, the Scoreth equivalent of someone taking a very deep breath before delivering bad news. "You touched it," Vrektal said. "It was falling. You touched the classified processing slate with your hands." Jake looked at his hands. They were still attached to his arms, which seemed like a good sign. "Was I not supposed to do that?" The blue bioluminescent lines along Vrektal's carapace seems flickered to life, pulsing gently. Behind him, a shelf unit containing what appeared to be 900 years of bureaucratic history let out a metallic groan that suggested it was reconsidering its structural integrity. "The slate," Vrektal said, his mandibles clicking with each syllable, "is now contaminated with your biometric signature. It will need to be quarantined, decontaminated, reclassified." His tail scraped across the floor, leaving a thin groove in the already gouged surface. "Do you understand what reclassification entails? Human. More forms, more forms." The shelf behind Vrektal chose that moment to surrender to entropy. It did not fall so much as disassemble, each component giving up independently in a cascading wave of failure that sent crystalline data cores, physical documents, and what appeared to be someone's lunch container tumbling toward the ground. Jake stepped left. Data core the size of his fist whistled past his ear. He stepped right. 3 documents fluttered by like startled birds. He ducked. The lunch container sailed overhead and exploded against the far wall, showering the room in something purple and viscous. Vrektal had not moved. His species was not built for rapid lateral movement, a fact that became apparent as a cascade of data slates buried him up to his chest plates. His 4 black eyes blinked in sequence, left to right, then right to left, as his mandibles continued clicking in what Jake suspected was the Scoreth equivalent of profanity. "I am going to need a supervisor," Vrektal announced from beneath the pile. "Would you like help getting out of there first? That would require you to touch classified materials." "Right." The door behind Jake slid open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded distinctly unhealthy. revealing Chitara the junior administrative clerk. She was smaller than Vrektal, her carapace a paler shade of rust that bordered on pink, and her bioluminescent stress lines were already glowing so brightly that she cast visible shadows on the walls. She had been glowing like that since Jake first met her, which had been approximately 40 minutes ago. He was beginning to suspect it was a permanent condition. The system flagged an anomaly, Chitara said, her voice pitched high enough to make Jake's teeth ache. An anomaly was flagged by the system. There is an anomaly, yes, Vrektal said, still buried to his thorax. The human's classification error has propagated. Propagated where? Vrektal's antennae somehow managed to flatten further, everywhere. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. He had been trying to fix this problem for 11 standard months. The problem in its simplest form was this: when he had first been registered in the Galactic Coalition's personnel database, someone had entered his occupational classification as civilian rather than logistics coordinator, military adjacent, security clearance level 4. The difference mattered. A logistics coordinator with security clearance could access supply manifests, coordinate troop movements, and requisition equipment. A civilian could access the commissary menu and a complaints form. Jake had filled out the complaints form 18 times. Each submission had generated an automated response thanking him for his interest in the Coalition's feedback program and inviting him to participate in a customer satisfaction survey. When you say everywhere, Jake said slowly, what do you mean exactly? Chitara's stress lines pulsed so rapidly they appeared solid. Reclassification request you submitted on Theta Station was processed incorrectly. Instead of changing your status from civilian to military adjacent, the system interpreted the request as a confirmation of your civilian status. It then pushed that confirmation to every database you had been entered into, which is how many databases? 47. Jake absorbed this information. And how many of those databases now list me as a civilian? 47. All of them. All of them. The shelf unit that had not yet collapsed made a sound like a dying animal. Jake moved 2 steps to his left without looking, and a drawer full of styluses crashed into the spot where he had been standing. Can you unpropagate it? He asked. Vrektal's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or might have been the early stages of a stress-induced seizure. Unpropagate is not a word that exists in Coalition standard. Then can you fix it? Fixing it would require filing a correction of erroneous classification form with each of the 47 databases independently. I can do that. Each form must be notarized by an official from the originating database. I can travel. Several of those databases are maintained by departments that no longer exist. Jake waited. There was always more. Additionally, Vrektal continued, finally extracting one arm from the pile of data slates and using it to gesture vaguely at the ceiling. Your file has been flagged by the military garrison on the station. Flagged for what? I do not know. The flag itself is classified. The flag about my classification is classified. Yes. And my classification is civilian. Yes, so a civilian classification flag is classified from civilians. Vrektal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Again. The system, he said slowly, is very thorough. The healthy door chose this moment to malfunction, sliding halfway open and then jamming with a mechanical shriek. Through the gap, Jake could see a corridor filled with Scoreth moving in what appeared to be controlled panic, their bioluminescent lines creating a flowing river of blue light. Chitara made a sound that was half whistle, half scream. The garrison has issued a lockdown notice. What does that mean? It means, Vrektal said finally, pulling himself free of the data slate pile and shedding several carapace flakes in the process. That Commander Thornax wants to speak with you. Jake did not know who Commander Thornax was, but the way both Scoreth stress lines flared suggested it was not someone who handled minor paperwork discrepancies. Can I just fill out another form? You are beyond forms now, human. Broken door gave up entirely, collapsing inward with a crash that sent Chitara scrambling backward, her tail knocking over a waste receptacle that spilled its contents across the floor. Jake stepped over the rolling debris without breaking stride, a skill he had developed over 11 months of interacting with Scoreth infrastructure. The records archive vault, Vrektal said, following Jake into the corridor. At the lumbering pace his species was restricted to, we need to access your original entry file if we can prove the error originated from a system glitch rather than user input. The garrison might accept a simplified correction protocol. There's a simplified protocol. There's a theoretical simplified protocol. No one has ever successfully completed it. What happens to people who try? Vrektal's mandibles clicked. They get reclassified as what? Pending. The corridor was chaos. Scoreth officials moved in both directions, their heavy tails leaving grooves in the floor as they rushed to destinations that seemed entirely unclear. Several of them were carrying data slates stacked so high they could not see over the top. One was attempting to drag a filing cabinet that was clearly not designed to be dragged, creating a screaming metallic protest that harmonized with the station's alarm system. Jake had not noticed when the alarm started. It was possible it had been going the entire time. This way, Chitara said, her voice barely audible over the din. She darted left into a side passage that was half the width of the main corridor and featured lighting that could generously be described as experimental. Every third light fixture was dead. Every fifth was flickering. The remaining ones cast shadows that made the walls appear to be moving. Is the archive far? Jake asked. 3 levels down. In the elevator out of service. Since when? 40 years. Jake absorbed this. The stairs. Emergency access only. This seems like an emergency. Chichira's stress lines pulsed. Administrative emergencies do not. For emergency stair access, what qualifies? Fire hole breach invasion. Not classification errors. Classification errors qualify for standard processing queues. How long is the standard processing queue? Currently 18 months. They had reached a junction where the side passage split into 3 equally uninviting options. Chichira took the leftmost path without hesitation, her smaller frame navigating the cramped space with ease. Vrextal followed, his broader carapace scraping against both walls simultaneously and leaving rust-colored scratches on the paneling. Jake followed them both, ducking under a Pipe that had no business being. Installed at head height and stepping. Over a puddle of something he chose not to identify. The archive vault is. Through maintenance access, Chichira explained, her voice echoing in the increasingly narrow passage, sublevel 3. The main entrance has been sealed. Since the incident. What incident? Vrextel made a sound that his translator rendered as untranslatable, but which conveyed deep and lasting trauma. There was a filing dispute, Chichira said. Carefully, several departments claimed jurisdiction over the same records. Dispute lasted for 3 years. When it concluded, 11 Skoroth had been reassigned to different systems. 2 departments had been formally dissolved, and the main archive entrance had been declared a structural hazard because of a filing dispute. Coalition bureaucracy, Vrextel said, takes paperwork very seriously. The passage terminated in a hatch that appeared to have been welded shut, then unwelded, then partially rewelded in a different configuration. Chichira produced a tool from somewhere in her carapace that Jake's brain refused to process and applied it to the hatches. Seal. The seal made a sound like a dying engine and released. Beyond was darkness. The lighting on sublevel 3 is motion activated, Chichira said, stepping through the hatch. Try not to move too quickly or the system will interpret you as a threat. What happens if the system interprets me as a threat? Automated containment protocols, which are foam. Jake followed her into the darkness. After 3 steps, lights flickered on around them, revealing a vast chamber filled with towering shelves that stretched up into shadows too deep for the inadequate lighting to penetrate. Each shelf was packed with crystalline data cores, their surfaces catching the dim light and refracting it into thousands of tiny rainbows. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Under these circumstances, Jake noticed that approximately 1 in 4 shelves was leaning at an angle that suggested imminent collapse. Your original file, Vrextel said, consulting a data slate he had produced from somewhere, is located in Section 47, Row 93, Position Delta. How far is that? Approximately 200 m. Through the unstable shelving. The shelving is rated for standard use. Is this standard use? Vrextel's antennae twitched. No, they began walking. Jake developed a rhythm of movement that involved listening for structural complaints, identifying which direction they were coming from, and positioning himself to be somewhere else. When the complaints became collapses, it was, he reflected, not unlike his job as a logistics coordinator. If he were still classified as a logistics coordinator, which he was not, because he was a civilian. There, Chichira said, pointing with one claw-tipped finger at a shelf that was leaning approximately 15 degrees off vertical. Section 47. Is it supposed to lean like that? It is rated for up to 20 degrees of deviation. That's very specific, Skoroth. Engineering is very precise. Jake approached the leaning shelf carefully. Row 93 was near the top, accessible only by a ladder that appeared to have been constructed from the same materials as the shelf and inspired the same confidence, which was none. Position Delta, he muttered, climbing. The ladder creaked with each step in a way that felt intentional, as though it were trying to communicate something important about his life choices. He found position Delta. He found the crystalline data core that contained his original registration file. He reached for it. The shelf moved, not collapsed. Moved, the entire structure shifted, approximately 3 in to the left, accompanied by a grinding sound that echoed through the vault like mechanical thunder. That's not supposed to happen, Chichira said from below, her stress lines now casting enough light to read. Jake grabbed the data core and descended the ladder at a speed that would definitely have triggered the motion-activated threat response if the lighting system had been paying attention. He hit the ground as the shelf shifted another 3 in, this time accompanied by the distinctive sound of crystalline data cores beginning to slide. Run, Vrextel said. They ran, or rather Jake ran. The Skoroth moved as quickly as their biology allowed, which was a kind of urgent lumbering that covered ground more effectively than it appeared to, while leaving deep gouges in the floor. Behind them, Section 47 surrendered to gravity. The collapse triggered Section 46. Section 46 triggered Section 45. The cascade continued in a domino effect. That would have been impressive if it were not also directly pursuing them. Jake tucked the data core under his arm and sprinted. Crystalline shards bounced off his back. Dust filled the air. The emergency lighting strobed in a pattern that suggested even it was panicking. They reached the hatch. They tumbled through. Chichira slammed it behind them just as the avalanche of records reached their position, the impact denting the metal inward by several inches. Well, Vrextel said, his bioluminescent lines pulsing so rapidly they appeared to be vibrating. That was Section 47. Through Section 12, gone. Comprehensively, Jake looked at the data core in his hands. But I got the file. You got a file? My file, theoretically. Chichira's data slate chirped. She looked at it and her stress lines somehow grew brighter still. The garrison has escalated their request, Commander. Thornax is no longer. We're asking to speak with you. What is he doing? Demanding. What's the difference? Asking involves optional compliance. Demanding involves armed escort. As if on cue, the junction at the end of the passage filled with the silhouettes of 4 Skoroth in military carapace armor. Their bioluminescent lines were a deep threatening blue, and each of them held weapons that Jake recognized from his logistics work as Category 3 deterrence, which was coalition terminology for devices capable of removing walls. Terran designation. Jake, the lead soldier, announced, his mandibles clicking with mechanical precision. You are required at the garrison command center immediately. Can I file a form first? The soldiers' 4 black eyes did not blink. You can file a form from detention. Am I being detained? That depends on your classification. I'm a civilian. The soldier consulted his own data slate. His stress lines flickered. Our records indicate you are also an unregistered combatant. That's not possible. I'm classified as civilian. Yes, and also as unregistered combatant. Those are contradictory. Yes. Jake looked at the data core in his hands. He looked at the armed soldiers. He looked at Vrextel and Chichira, both of whom had achieved stress glow levels that could probably be seen from orbit. Commander Thornax, he said slowly, is going to want an explanation. Commander Thornax, the soldier replied, is going to want many things. The military garrison command center had been designed by someone who believed that intimidation was a function of architecture Every surface was angular. Every light source was positioned to cast dramatic shadows. The walls were lined with weapons that Jake suspected were ceremonial but could not confirm because several of them were pointed in his general direction. Commander Thornex stood behind a tactical display table that flickered with holographic representations of things Jake was probably not cleared to see. The commander was massive even by Skoroth standards, his scarred carapace, a deep burgundy that spoke of age and violence. One of his antennae was missing entirely, leaving a jagged stump that twitched occasionally as though remembering what it used to do. His bioluminescent stress lines were not pulsing, they were solid, bright, continuous. Jake had never seen Skoroth with continuous stress glow before. He found it significantly more unsettling than the pulsing variety. "Sit," Commander Thornex said. Jake looked at the chair provided. It was Skoroth designed, which meant it featured a curved back to accommodate carapace and a cutout for tail passage. For a human, it would function approximately like sitting on a very uncomfortable toilet. He sat anyway. The chair made a sound of protest that suggested it had not been expecting his weight distribution. Jake shifted. The chair shifted with him. He stopped moving before the relationship between them could deteriorate further. "You are classified as civilian," Commander Thornex said. "Yes, you are. Also classified as unregistered combatant. Apparently you were present during the Karath Station incident 4 months ago." Jake thought back. Karath Station had been a supply depot. He had been coordinating a shipment of medical equipment. There had been a minor altercation involving disputed cargo manifests in a forklift that someone had accidentally driven through a wall. "I was doing my job," he said. "Your job as a civilian." "My job as a logistics coordinator." "You are not classified as a logistics coordinator." "I know, that's why I'm trying to fix the classification." Commander Thornex's mandibles clicked, a rhythm that Jake's translator could not parse. The tactical display flickered and suddenly it was showing Jake's personnel file projected large enough for everyone in the room to see. The file was a disaster. Classification fields overlapped. Status indicators contradicted each other. There were timestamps that appeared to reference dates that had not happened yet and authorization codes from departments that Jake was fairly certain had never existed. "This," Commander Thornex said, gesturing at the holographic catastrophe with one claw-tipped hand, "is your record. It's not supposed to look like that." "No, it is not." Chitara made a small sound from somewhere behind Jake. He had not realized she and Brexto had followed him into the command center. Turning slightly, he saw them both pressed against the far wall, their stress glow creating a combined illumination that rivaled the overhead lighting during the Karath Station incident. Commander Thornex continued, "You were logged as civilian personnel in a restricted military zone. This should have triggered immediate detention. It did not. I had authorization. Your authorization was issued to a logistics coordinator. You are not classified as a logistics coordinator. Therefore, the authorization was invalid. Therefore, you were trespassing. Therefore, you should have been detained, but I wasn't." "No, because the system also had you flagged as military adjacent due to a secondary classification error that originated from your initial registration on Theta Station. Jake felt a headache forming. So I was both unauthorized and authorized simultaneously. And no one noticed. The system noticed. The system created a flag. The flag was classified because it referenced your classification, which was itself in dispute. The classified flag then triggered a security review, which could not be completed because the reviewer did not have clearance to access classified flags about disputed classifications. That seems like a design flaw. Commander Thornax's continuous stress glow somehow intensified. The system is functioning exactly as designed. The tactical display flickered again. New information appeared scrolling past. Too quickly for Jake to read, but slowly enough for him to notice that his name was appearing with alarming frequency. Your presence on the station, Commander Thornax said, has created a jurisdictional paradox. As a civilian, you fall under civil administration. As an unregistered combatant, you fall under military tribunal. As someone with a disputed classification flag, you fall under the classification authority. These three bodies do not agree on who has primary jurisdiction. What happens when they don't agree? They form a tribunal, another tribunal, a joint tribunal, a joint tribunal. Jake looked at the data core he was still carrying. He had almost forgotten about it. I have my original file from the archive. It should show that the initial classification was an error. Commander Thornax extended one hand. Jake placed the data core in it. The commander inserted it into a port on the tactical display, and the holographic mess expanded to include new information. Everyone in the room went still. This file, Commander Thornax said slowly, indicates that your original classification was entered correctly as logistics coordinator. Good. It also indicates that the classification was changed to civilian by an authorized administrator 3 days after your initial registration. What? Who changed it? The administrator code is no longer in the active database because the administrator retired, because the administrator never existed. Jake stared at the display. Someone who doesn't exist changed my classification. According to your original file, yes. That's impossible. Many things in your file are impossible, and yet. Commander Thornax gestured at the holographic disaster still rotating above the table. The door to the command center slid open with the unhealthy hiss that Jake was beginning to associate with all Skorath infrastructure. 3 more Skorath entered, each wearing ceremonial sashes that indicated rank or department, or possibly both. Their stress glow was already active, pulsing in nervous rhythms. The tribunal representatives, Commander Thornax announced, civil administration, classification, authority, military command. Jake remained in his uncomfortable chair. Is there going to be a trial? There is going to be a discussion about my classification. About what? To do with you. The 3 tribunal representatives took positions around the tactical display. The one from civil administration was elderly. Her carapace faded to pale orange. The one from classification authority was young and twitchy, her antennae in constant motion. The one from military command was Commander Thornax himself. The matter before this tribunal, the civil administration representative began is the classification status of the Terran designated Jake. He is a civilian, the classification authority representative said. Immediately, he is an unregistered combatant. Commander Thornex countered, he cannot be both, and yet he is. Jake raised his hand. Everyone looked at him. Could you just pick one? The classification authority representative's antennae went rigid. Pick one arbitrarily. Flip a coin. Whatever you do when records disagree. We do not flip coins. Then what do you do? We form committees. Committees investigate. The investigation produces reports. The reports are reviewed by additional committees. The review generates recommendations. The recommendations are submitted for approval. The approval process triggers an audit. The audit identifies discrepancies. The discrepancies require investigation by more committees. Yes. Jake absorbed this. How long does that take? The current record is 47 years for a classification dispute, for a classification dispute involving a single individual with errors in 3 databases. The classification authority representative stress glow pulsed rapidly. You have errors in 47 databases. The mathematical projection for your case resolution exceeds practical calculation limits. The civil administration representative made a sound that might have been a sigh if Skorath had lungs capable of sighing. There is, she said carefully, an alternative. Everyone looked at her. We could create a new classification. The room went silent. Commander Thornax's stress glow flickered for the first time. The classification authority representative looked like she might collapse. A new classification, the young representative. That would require approval from the central authority, signature from the director of records, amendment to the classification codex, notification to all 47 databases. Yes, that would take years. It would take approximately 8 months. 8 months is better than 47 years. Jake felt hope stir in his chest, a sensation he had learned to distrust. Over the past 11 months, what would the new classification be? The civil administration representative consulted a data slate that materialized from somewhere in her ceremonial sash. We would designate you as Terran. Anomaly. Category, administrative exception. Status, permanently pending. Your classification would officially be in a state of ongoing review. This would allow you access to all systems that require a classification to be present, while simultaneously preventing any system from rejecting you based on incorrect classification. Because my classification would always be under review. Exactly. Jake considered this. Would I be able to do my job? You would be able to do any job. The system would be unable to confirm or deny your authorization for any role. That seems like it could be abused. It could. We trust that you will not abuse it. Commander Thornax's mandibles clicked. This is irregular. Everything about this case is irregular, the civil administration representative replied. We are simply matching our solution to the problem. The tactical display flickered one final time. Jake's personnel filed the holographic disaster that had followed him across 3 star systems and 11 months of bureaucratic nightmare. compressed into a single line of text. Classification, Terran anomaly. Administrative exception, status. Permanently pending, all in favor. The civil administration, representative. Ask Three Hands rose, commander. Thornex's rose last and most. Reluctantly, but it rose, the tribunal. Has reached a decision, the Terran. Designated Jake is hereby classified as Terran anomaly. This classification is effective immediately and retroactively. Applying to all 47 databases currently containing his records. Jake stood up from the uncomfortable chair. It made a sound of relief. Does this mean I can leave? You can. Leave and do my job. You can do any job. What if someone questions my authorization? Commander Thornex's stress glow had finally begun to pulse normally again. You show them your classification, they will see that it is under review, they will assume someone else is handling the problem. They will let you pass. Jake walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, turning back to face the assembled Skorath officials, all of whom had stress glow patterns that would probably take weeks to fully subside. Thank you, he said, for not making me fill out another form, Commander. Thornex's mandibles clicked. There will be forms, of course there will. Approximately 230 forms. When are they due? They are due when your classification review concludes, which is never. Your classification is permanently pending. Jake smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had managed in 11 months of fighting coalition bureaucracy. So the forms are due. Never technically, yes. He walked out of the garrison command center past the armed guards who no longer seemed certain whether they should stop him, through corridors filled with Skorath, whose stress glow flickered with confusion as they checked their data slates and found a classification that explained nothing while authorizing everything. Behind him he heard Commander Thornex's voice one final time. Someone update the training manuals. We have a new classification category, and somewhere in the depths of the coalition's administrative systems, 47 databases simultaneously updated to reflect a truth that everyone had been forced to accept. Some problems could not be solved. They could only be reclassified. Jake returned to the classification processing center 3 weeks later, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to see if the place had recovered. It had not. Vrexter was still buried in data slates, though a different pile than before. Chatara's stress glow had faded from blinding to merely concerning. The shelf that had not collapsed during his first visit had finally given up and lay in pieces across the floor. You, Vrexter said, his 4 black eyes tracking Jake across the room. You came back. I brought lunch. Jake held up a container. Figured I owed you for that. Archive vault. You destroyed sections 12 through 47. Technically, gravity destroyed them. Vrexter's mandibles clicked. His antennae twitched. His bioluminescent lines flickered once, then went dark. Jake realized with some surprise that this was the Skorath equivalent of laughter. Terran anomaly. Vrexter said, the first of your kind. Hopefully the last. Unlikely. Your species has a talent for breaking systems that were never designed to accommodate you. Jake set the lunch container on the curved desk. It immediately slid toward the floor. He caught it. Yeah, he said, we really do